What comes to mind for you when I say technology and the public sector, or government and innovation? Do you have your image? Did you think of Apollo 11 and humankind's first visit to the moon? Did you think of the sterile smell of a hospital and the knock, knock, knock of your last MRI and the technology that was built out of the research and development that came from our national labs? Or did you instinctively reach out for your smartphone and think about the microchips that were invented by Texas Instruments, for whose first customers were NASA and the US Air Force? Did you think about the internet that you hold in the palm of your hand that derived from ARPANET and entities like Fermilab, who had one of the first websites out there in the public web? Did you think about the GPS technology? Did you think about Apple having a very early investment from a small business government investment? Or did you have another image? If you had another image, for sure, this session is for you. I'm delighted to have a panel with me today to help paint a picture of engaging with the public sector in quantum computing. And today we're going to talk about the benefits of engaging with the public sector, including the benefit of funding, the benefit of timing and being able to engage the early market, and the benefit of exposure to the variety of types of problems that quantum computing may be able to help solve in the future. So it's my pleasure today to introduce to you a panel with some different backgrounds to help paint the landscape of engaging with the public sector. First of all, we have Eric Holland here, the Deputy Head of Quantum Technology at Fermilab. We have Dr. Sabine Blankenship, who's the Science Liaison at the German Consulate in San Francisco. We have Mr. Brian Worth, who's a partner at Franklin Square Group in Washington, D.C. And we have Tricia Klinger, who's at Rigetti, Australia, and comes to us with a background in financial services governance. And I'm Mandy Birch. I lead our engineering strategy group, which includes our government solutions team. So I'm just going to start out with the bottom line. We talked about the benefit of funding. Brian, today has been a pretty exciting day in Washington, D.C. when it comes to budgets, particularly for quantum. But you've been watching trends for a while. Can you tell us what's happening today, like literally today, and what you've been seeing over the last few years?
Sure. Thank you. So today, the White House, the Trump administration, rolled out their budget request for fiscal year 2021, which will be the next year's spending. Significantly, we saw last year in the spending for this year in FY20, a significant increase in money for AI at different federal agencies and also for quantum. And we saw a big jump in the language and the focus on quantum and federal spending. This is a priority of the Trump administration, and specifically the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House, which is actually run by people who actually have PhDs and real science people. So you can put aside all your feelings about the Trump administration. Otherwise, their OSTP is actually a pretty serious operation they've got. And so this year, they followed up on last year's spending with some big requests this year. They almost doubled their request for R&D spending in the federal government. And just to give you some scope of what we're talking about, I apologize I scribbled the notes down as I was looking up my phone here before I came up here. $142 billion is their request for R&D spending. That's a pretty significant increase. Quantum specifically, they have a $120 million request for the National Science Foundation for the National Quantum Initiative. The Department of Energy for QIS, they have a $237 million request. At the Department of Defense, they have a $14 billion request in their Science and Technology Department. This will include quantum, AI, and machine learning and a couple other things. But those are pretty significant increases they're asking for this year. And as you read through the budget itself, the narrative in the budget talks about the long-term investment. It talks about quantum specifically, what it can do to change the future over the next couple of decades. So they're really looking at this as a long-term investment. And I think quantum, and the national security and the administration's focus on China specifically and the national security implications of what they see as a modern day arms race. This is some redux of the Cold War, except without the nuclear holocaust is hanging over our head. But this is, they see this as a modern day arms race. This is, we're in a race with China to quantum supremacy, and I think the administration appreciates, and Congress is coming around to it as well, appreciates the narrative that there's no second place in this race at some level. Either the winner's going to get all the brain power and get all the knowledge, and that means all the money follows after it. So they're making a serious investment in it, not just in the dollar amount, but you can read in the narrative of the budget what they're talking about. This actually means something to them on how they see it as a long-term vision past the tenure or whatever, whether it's this year or 5 years from now when the Trump administration ends. They're seeing this as a longer-term investment for the benefit of the United States.
Thank you for that overview of what's going on in the U.S. landscape. Sabine, could you add, you bring a different perspective, and I think Germany launched the framework last year, a significant amount of investment in quantum technology. Could you share what the landscape looks like from your perspective?
So in terms of funding, I can add the European perspective, and it got mentioned earlier today already, the flagship project. It's the third flagship project that the European Union decided on. It's $1 billion over 10 years. So, yours were yearly figures. Here, this is 10 years, but it is a significant increase. It's fourfold more than we spent in the previous decades. Mm-hmm. So that's a sign. And then for Germany, we have a 650 million euro budget that got decided by our parliament for the years 2018 through 2022. And there's intent to continue that, subject to approval by the parliament. But we also think that this is a long-term game, and we're in it for the long term. Mm-hmm. Oh, and maybe the Netherlands, I should mention, if we're talking about Europe, very small country, 146 million over 10 years. But if you look at how tiny the Netherlands are, I think it's significant. The UK, 270 million pounds over 5 years. So we're not alone in this in Europe.
How about from Australia, Tricia?
I would love to say our figures are the same, but sadly not. What we're up to in Australia at the moment is there's been significant effort more in the research and development stage, and what we're now seeing is our national science body looking at developing their roadmap. So you spoke about the importance of getting involved in terms of the development of the ecosystem. I think that's a really important thing that we will be doing with the Australian government and other participants in the Australian ecosystem, is really just to have a place in the table to talk about not only, I suppose, what the academic areas of interest and influence, but also to actually look at where the commercial opportunities lie. And interestingly, that's where the chief scientist in Australia is actually looking for insights as well. I think Australia's had a great track record in terms of academic excellence, but has probably failed to commercialise a lot of the opportunities that we've had available. And so with this roadmap is really an opportunity for us as an industry to get involved and actually give some real commercial insights and direction. Most of the money to date that I'm seeing is not in that great investment in specific areas. We're just really focusing in Australia. Really, it's a lot about enablement of training of students, and I suppose having a quantum-ready workforce. They've set aside about $15 million recently in the government area specifically for that, but certainly not the numbers that we're hearing from Europe and from in the US.
And how about you, Eric? You come from a perspective of being inside the Department of Energy. Have you seen an increase in interest in quantum over the last few years as well?
Yeah. Yes? This is working, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So about 4 years ago, when I was looking to change jobs from industry, I decided to join the Department of Energy. Because if you look back over the last decade, the Department of Energy has been doing a dance with quantum. So the Department of Energy has 17 national laboratories, and they all on some level reflect the interests and priorities of the nation, as they must, because we're funded by the taxpayers. So over the past decade, the Department of Energy has really done its homework and gotten really serious in quantum. So they've really jumped in a big way, as Brian was saying earlier. So yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we've covered some of the benefits from a funding perspective. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the benefits of timing as well, and being able to engage with the early market, which we're seeing more traction on the government side at this point than we are in the commercial sector right now. So Sabine, you've talked about the framework that you have in Germany. Can you tell us a little bit more? The framework came out last year. Why now, and what are you trying to achieve?
So now, let's define the now a little more. Our Federal Ministry for Education and Research started in 2016 and already was funding. Of course, I mean, it's been ongoing, right? We have had a funding level of 100 million for years. So it's not that it's out of nothing. So I guess that's my first point. But then I think there's a realization that the technology just has enormous potential, and we're a high-tech country, and we need to be in this, right? So if everybody else in the world is investing who is a high-tech country, we certainly must be there as well. So that's a very simple reason, but it's a very motivating one for policymakers, right? Second, we're not alone in this, like we mentioned all the other programs already. And then third, maybe there's an inherent national security interest. Technology sovereignty is a word that is mentioned a lot in Europe these days. It's important and it's a strategic policy goal. So if for that you need to be in quantum technologies, then we need to invest in it now. And then lastly, I think we think of Germany as having 3 advantages right now that if we invest now decisively, we can really leverage to be a key player in the field. And those 3 advantages would be that we have the small and medium-sized companies who serve the enabling technology for it, right? So be it high-precision sensors by Bosch, be it cooling and vacuum systems, be it micro-manufacturing processes, lasers, etc. So we have a very strong provider community in Germany that has to gain from this. The second one is we have large companies that are testing this out right now that can provide use cases. And the third is certainly scientific excellence. If you look at Europe, I think 50% of the academic papers come out of Europe. We're very strong there. And what we want to do with we call it National Framework Program, and its title is Quantum Technologies from Basic Research to Market. So we want to build out an innovation ecosystem. We want to really connect the dots. And that's where most of that funding goes, is to achieve that. And I want to mention, in terms of the National Framework Program, it's an effort to combine the agendas of several different ministries. It's not just research and education anymore, but it's also our Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, but also Interior and Defense. So, and the Federal Chancellery had also a say in developing all of this. Okay. So it's a joint effort. And it's not just quantum computing, it's quantum technologies. So definitely for Germany also a large part in quantum communication, quantum sensors, and then the enabling technologies because of our small and medium-sized companies.
I love it that you had advantages at our Advantage event. Yes. That's nice. How about from your perspective, Brian? I mean, you've worked with a lot of tech companies over the years, and how are you seeing the timing evolve in quantum from a DC perspective?
I think quantum is now, and I think technology, the idea of technology independence, or this, again, the arms race with China, and I don't want to belabor that point or be too hyperbolic about this, but I think there is, and you see this with the conversations around Huawei and what to do with that technology. Technology becomes so much of a part of our life now. We all live on our phones. You can call them bad things if you want. You can say you spend too much time on your screen, but it's just a part of our everyday life, and it's part of the way our world works. At AWS up here, things are in the cloud. We're not escaping this. There's no place where we're going to have less technology involved. So I think the government's seeing this as, something where there is a real national interest in not just having the best technologies just to say you have it, but it's essential to our independence as a nation, our national security. And I think it's really come around in the last few years. And again, the Trump administration's been driving this a lot the past 3 years, especially because they're very aggressive on this front, and they don't suffer red tape too well, and they're not too interested in waiting a long time to get results on things. They want them now. So it's really changed a lot the past few years, I think. And again, some of this is just you have younger generational lawmakers coming into Congress. People are more used to dealing with technology. Technology doesn't seem like something that's an episode of the Jetsons or Star Trek. It's something we're all used to now, and the world's changed a lot in the past several decades in that sense, and people can appreciate it. And so it's made folks more open to wanting to pursue technological advances, whether it's AI or quantum or whatever it might be, but it's opened people up a little bit more to it, I think.
And as I think about timing and the national labs, Eric, Fermilab has a reputation for being able to take on some of the grandest challenges in understanding our universe in a long view. Can you shed some light, maybe less so on the timing, but just more the opportunity for the types of problems? What are some of the applications within the high energy physics community or others that you've been exposed to that make it now the time to invest in quantum?
Yeah, 100%. So Fermilab is a basic research institution, which there are several others, but Fermilab is the premier US particle physics laboratory. And one of the big sort of transformative breakthroughs that quantum will offer will be in fundamental basic science and understanding our universe. So for Fermilab, things that we care about are quantum simulation, we care about quantum sensing, and we also care about data science and analytics. You can kind of look across the board, and there's many avenues, and those are just what we already know of. And the interesting thing about the quantum journey is going to be discovering what it's useful for that people didn't anticipate. And that's going to be a direction that's really going to coalesce a lot of resources. So we heard a lot about variational quantum eigensolving today. So before that, if you asked somebody what quantum was going to be good for, it was going to be factoring prime numbers. But since then, there's been a big cottage industry of let's do molecular structure calculations. So as we move forward into the future, yeah, it's just going to be really interesting to see where things develop. And you hit the nail on the head where it's, as a particle physics lab, we are very much used to being at the forefront of technology, so it's not something that we're scared of. Things being a little uncharted and needing to develop daring new technologies to meet the needs of the universe, that's something that we're comfortable with. So quantum just fits in very well with national laboratory ecosystem.
I love these big dreams, and it's why it's such a pleasure to be able to work with Fermilab and other organizations who can take the long view. As a small company, we often have a shorter-term view, so it's a real pleasure to partner.
And can I just echo that too, because I think government really does take the long view on things, and I think that that's probably the real opportunity in the short term for showcasing applications. I think a lot of the challenges in industries is really around, I suppose, often the very short-term nature of the CTOs look at return, or even at a senior CEO level, the KPIs are very different around technology and how you embrace that. And I think in the government sector, and especially a place like Fermilab, it's the ability to take that long-term perspective, which I think will enable the investment that's required in developing those use cases.
I think something to build off there, Eric said, people had a concept of quantum, and now we're realizing it can do a lot more things. It could be applied to a lot more things than people had originally thought. And I think one of the challenges you have when you're dealing with the government is this especially is a highly complex topic. I like to tell my Chad Rigetti story. We took Chad to Capitol Hill to meet with some senators, and we had a senator come into a meeting, and he writes a bunch of ones and zeros on a sheet of paper, and he says, okay, so this is normal code. Tell me how quantum's different from this. And Chad didn't miss a beat. He said, I could explain this to you for 3 hours and you wouldn't understand it any more than you do right now. So you should just accept that quantum does what I say it's going to do, and we should move on to the good things that quantum can do. Which he was right, and thankfully the senator is a humble enough person that he took that on face value and just moved on. But that's exactly right, and I think that's a challenge of something like quantum and understanding what quantum can do and making lawmakers and policymakers in the government understand the potential of this is they don't understand the baseline of it, so it's kind of hard to understand what it can do. So I thought the afternoon sessions here was more instructive for me because this is what quantum can be applied to. And one of the things we've worked with Rigetti on over the past 18 months or so is an issue another senator brought up to us was PFAS contamination. PFAS is a chemical compound. I can't even tell you what the 4 letters stand for. PFAS is the acronym. It's a fire retardant. It's a side effect of fire retardants that the Air Force uses for runways. It's leaching into the groundwater. It's causing water contamination. No one knows how bad it is. No one knows how to remediate it also. We had a senator ask us, well, can you use quantum to fix that? And sure, quantum could be part of the solution, help find the solution to this problem, right? Because quantum can do a lot of things that we haven't thought of yet. And so you need the problem, and then you can have quantum come in as a solution. But the more you can make that a quantifiable thing for people, something they understand. We have a problem with PFAS. Okay, quantum can help me with that. And that the less it seems like a kind of pie in the sky 40 years from now, this is, like I said, like Star Trek or the Jetsons, it's more real to folks. If you talk about pharmaceuticals and things like that, it's more real to people when you can do it that way. So some of it comes to finding those opportunities of, oh, quantum can be part of this. That makes it tangible for the lawmakers and the policymakers and the government, and they have a reason then to invest more in it and more in something specific.
I think it's very important that government and policymakers have trusted sources to get a good estimate, of what capabilities the systems have, because we can't have members of parliament can't possibly, we can't require that of them. People say we need more people who understand the technologies in government, but I don't think that's really, look at all the fields that they would have to understand, and it's not realistic, but we need those trusted go-betweens, I guess, that can translate that. I think that's a need that government has that could be filled more.
So this kind of ties into something we had spoken about earlier, in that as an industry, quantum could be substantially helped by having very succinct white papers that give use cases in a very readable, easy to understand format. So I mean really condensed. So 1 page, simple wording, one really nice figure that gets across one clear idea. That's something that all around is really missing. There are documents out there that are more written like tombs. So you just can't expect somebody to read a 200-page document and fully absorb everything in there. It would be nice if there were a lot of really succinct, crisp white papers that you could sit down and in 20 seconds get the gist of why this is really important.
Pictures and 2-syllable words. That's your best asset.
It's one of the most difficult things about engaging in the conversation on this, because there's so many potential applications and it's so early that I think that's a great call to action, Eric, is to think about how we can explain more in depth some of these, particularly the near-term cases for quantum. So all of you at some point have mentioned the importance of collaboration, whether that's public to public and different government entities working together. We're talking about public-private cooperation. We're talking about the role of academia. So we know that it's going to take an ecosystem to advance this industry. So Trish, I was wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the things that you're hearing in Australia? Who are some of the actors in this space? What are they bringing to the table, and how are they working together?
I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of one of the biggest issues being collaboration, because that came out in our chief scientist's sort of issues of concern or key risks. It's the fact that, in Australia we've got a lot of academic excellence in the area, but how do we collaborate? There's obviously got centres of excellence, but how do we collaborate the academic side also with basically what are the commercial issues? And I think I suppose getting involved in a collaborative manner with the government and academic institutions together, working through a roadmap is kind of one way of kind of working through that issue. But I think it's going to be an ongoing thing. I think collaboration in terms of the universities working more closely together happens naturally. I think getting government involved in that is something that probably we're going to work on. I think as part of the chief scientist's role, once the white paper or once the document is produced, is actually working with particular individual legislators in government in Australia and actually taking the document as a roadmap and really, I suppose, increasing that liaison with government officials. So that's sort of, I suppose, how we're hoping to see collaboration work more effectively than probably what we've got at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, I'd love to hear from you. Fermilab has a reputation of having great international collaboration already, and we've talked more recently about the role of technology transfer with the public and the private sector. Can you shed some light on how Fermilab is collaborating?
In quantum or in general?
Both.
So, one thing that you can point to is that Fermilab is in the process of upgrading their on-site accelerator, which will be an international collaboration, and that's a first for the U.S. So that's already one instance where you can point to a large international collaboration that's happening on U.S. soil that involves partners like Italy, the UK, India, and then internationally, Fermilab is the US gateway to CERN. So international collaboration is something that Fermilab prides itself on and also strives towards. So when you drive up to Fermilab, there's typically around 30 international flags hanging out in front of the main building. So it's very clear that it's meant to be an inclusive environment. And that's something that Fermilab really prides itself on, and something that's going to be necessary in quantum. So no one country has a monopoly on the intellectual capital needed to succeed in this space. So international collaboration is key. And then you asked about tech transfer. So the Department of Energy has invested tens of billions of dollars in infrastructure and personnel, and it is always a huge win for the US government when that investment can be leveraged to help sustain the US economy. So quantum could be a use case of that, where it's there is a lot of on-site expertise and unique, one in the world infrastructure that could be potentially quite useful for quantum. Thanks.
And Sabine, how about in Germany? We discussed a bit about the role of now is the time to begin taking some of the academic innovation and really doing more applied research and creating value in the national economy as well. Can you say more about how Germany approaches the framework in that area?
Yeah, so a number of things that government can do, a toolkit that we have, and in the National Framework Program, for example, there's grants for startups, specifically for startups. There's competitions, kind of the DARPA idea. We also are implementing, our ministries of defense and interior are going to, invest and incorporate a DARPA-like, German DARPA-like agency. There's grants that require that the grant application is enterprise-led, so we're trying to combine all of these tools that we have in our toolkit to foster, the ecosystem. It's a good word, ecosystem, community. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. That's great. Thank you. So we also wanted to leave a little bit of time for any of you who may have questions on the advantages of engaging with the public sector. So we have a few minutes here we have a microphone coming your way.
Hi. I was wondering, what are the lessons that we learn from AI that we could apply to quantum? So if we were going to redo the whole AI introduction of technology, but with quantum, did we learn anything from that experience?
I mean, we should have. I think the challenge with AI and quantum's, AI is the hot thing right now. In politics in the world where I worked, prior to that, everyone talked about the Internet of Things. This idea of the Internet of Things was hot for 4 or 5 years. It was kind of the catch-all that got slapped on everything because no one understands what any of it is on Capitol Hill, so they just slapped that on it and it sounds good. AI is kind of the same thing, and you can thank Mark Zuckerberg a little bit for that because AI was going to fix any of the problems with Facebook. So now anything that's an algorithm is AI in most lawmakers' minds. So I think the lesson that should be learned from that, and that I would hope we would do with quantum, is to more narrowly tailor how we want to do that. So instead of having a broad, it's okay, the budget numbers I read off to you are for quantum research, and that's great. But as we move forward next year and the year after that, that needs to get more narrowly tailored and narrowly focused, I think, to get the results the government's going to want faster, so you avoid having something where everything has the title quantum slapped on it so it can get some more money thrown to it. And you wind up then you having a big spray pattern instead of a real narrow kind of focus to hit your target. That's my takeaway from it. It's not bad what the government's doing in AI right now either, but like everything is AI and every department's got AI, and it's just not efficient, I would say.
Can I just add to that? I think that AI has got a lot of politicians focused on the real economic driver a new technology can be. So I think if I look at what I see in the Australian context, you see a lot of people talking about new technologies and in that same sentence talking about jobs and growth. So I think it's got them to focus on an opportunity and what it could mean for the economy more broadly, rather than just that's another technology that we need, that's somebody else looking after. They really see, I think, in Australia particularly, as an opportunity to leverage on the strengths and see if we can play a significant role and benefit from that growth.
I would want to add two things. One, get tech transfer get startups out of universities more generally from Germany for all technologies, and then also manage that it doesn't become such a hype when you communicate with policymakers.
I'll be more positive. I think the recent success of AI has helped quantum. So for many years, people were very skeptical of AI, and then it turned out to be a huge economic vehicle. And at least what I've seen is a lot of companies that were very skeptical on AI are now much more quick to jump into quantum, in part because they don't want to miss out. So if anything, I think quantum is being helped by AI, and we're learning the lesson that, or at least I hope we're learning the lesson that just because something doesn't work now doesn't mean that you need to give up on it. So something that I've talked to Mandy about is when people get very skeptical about quantum, I ask if they have children. And most people that are of a certain age say yes, that they do. And I say, oh, the day that your baby was born, were you excited or deeply disappointed? They're like, no, obviously I was excited. And I was like, well, you couldn't have an intellectual conversation with your child. Why wouldn't you be deeply disappointed? And then at that time, they kind of get it, that there's a big difference between the potential that you hold and can see in your hands and it coming to fruition. And we're all sort of struggling right now in quantum, trying to have that moment where the toddler says something profound, and you just can't predict when that's going to be. But, you know, have a little patience. And again, sorry, the long view.
Is there another question? Okay, well then we'll take this opportunity to wrap up. As I reflect on Rigetti's mission to build the world's most powerful computers in order to help solve humanity's most pressing and important problems, you can't exclude the public sector when you're talking about addressing humanity's most important and pressing problems, whether you're talking in the realm of security or economic prosperity. So I want to thank all of the panel members, but before we go, I'm wondering if you could just give your last bits of advice as we think about the benefits, the advantages of engaging with the public sector. What would you like to leave the audience with today?
For me, I think that there's no downside. They're the opportunity to help develop use cases, and I think it's to not engage is to really miss an opportunity.
I second that, and I think when you do engage, I always just encourage people to understand who your audience is and who you're engaging with. Most of the people that you're going to engage with in the government are people like me who wouldn't understand a single thing that was said today in this conference up until now. But that doesn't mean they're not interested in potential supporters for what you're doing.
I'm here to foster collaborations, to make connections. I have a list here of the German excellent researchers and companies, so talk to me later.
I very much enjoyed the presentation by the other Eric that was basically saying that we need to get quantum in more people's hands, and that's something that hasn't existed up until recently. It's only been the past few years that quantum even existed on the cloud. So just getting that sort of tinkering mindset so that more people can contribute will be something that'll help. So fostering collaboration, and that's what we saw today. That's all exciting.
Well, thank you very much for these final words, a call to action. Make sure during the happy hour, if you'd like to engage with one of our panelists, they'll be here. Also, if you'd like to engage with Rigetti on pursuing government opportunities together, please reach out to me either at the happy hour or my email is real simple. It's Mandy, M-A-N-D-Y, @rigetti.com. And we look forward to engaging with you. So thanks again to my panelists.